so lesson objective today, students use quadratics to solve vertical motion problems. So we're going to be talking about two different types of vertical motion. First, we'll be talking about just a falling object, like you drop something from a building or a bridge or whatever. And then the other type is going to be when we have an object that's thrown or launched, like when you kick a soccer ball. So the first one we'll be dealing with is a fallen object. And it can be modeled using h equals negative 16t squared plus s. And what each of those is, h is the height in feet. T is your time in seconds. And then S is the starting height. And that's also in feet. So H is your height, T is your time, S is where you start. So if I look at example 1, a construction worker drops a wrench off the top of a 144-foot tall building. How many seconds will it take to hit the ground? So I need to figure out what's H, what's T, what's S. So I see that he dropped a wrench off of a 144-foot tall building. So which one do you guys think that is? It's either the height or the starting point. It's where he starts, right? It started at 144 feet. So that's going to be my S. And then how many seconds? We're talking about what? But which one? H, T, or S? Time, right? So the time equals I don't know what. And then when it hits the ground, that's the height at the end, right? Okay, so how high is it if it's on the ground? Not at all. What do you call not at all? What number would I use to represent that? 0. Yeah. Okay. So my height is 0 feet, my time is what I don't know and I'm trying to find, and my starting point is 144 feet. So you just put that into the equation. H equals negative 16t squared plus s. So where the h is, I put a 0. I just leave the t squared alone because I don't know what it is, and where the s is, I put 144. And now it's just a matter of solving and getting t squared alone. So these are the kind of problems that you can do using square roots because there's no t term in the middle. There's just a t squared and a number. So I add 16t squared to both sides. And then I have 16t squared is equal to 144. So to get the t squared alone, I divide by 16. And I get the t squared is equal to 9. So what do we suppose the time is then? What do I have to do? Take the square root, okay? And so what does t equal? Right. Now, normally it would be plus or minus 3, right? But can we go backwards in time? No, we can't. So we just throw out the negative one. So the time would be 3 seconds. So it would take 3 seconds for a wrench to fall 144 feet. All right, let's take a look at example 2. An object is dropped from a height of 625 feet. What will its height be after falling for 3 seconds? Use h equals negative 16t squared plus s. All right, so they gave me two things. They gave me 625 feet, they gave me 3 seconds, and they're saying what will its height be? So, do I have a volunteer to tell me what they think 625 is? H, S, or T? The starting point, yeah, S. And what will its height be? Then that has to be the H. And 3 seconds is the time. All right. So I want you guys to plug in S and T. Show me what you get when you plug it in. Just show me like the initial, how you would write the equation initially before you solve it. All right, so when you plugged it in, you guys got h equals negative 16, and then for t you put in a 3, so 3 squared, plus 625, right? So if we use order of operations, what's the first thing you have to do? Parentheses or exponents. Either way, what is 3 squared? 9. So then what am I going to do next? Multiply or add? Got to multiply first, right? So the height equals negative 144 plus 625. And so some of you already did this. You should have gotten 481 feet. Okay? All right, now let's look at the rest of this example. It says, when will the object hit the ground? So now they're saying when. That means I don't know my time anymore, do I? Hit the ground means h equals what? What is the height when it's laying on the ground? 0. Okay? So now I'm still going to use my h equals negative 16t squared plus s. This time h is 0. And I don't know t squared, plus my starting height, which they gave me up above, was 625. So why don't you guys see if you can get the t squared alone at least. Get the t squared alone, and then if you can, take the square root of it to find the answer. Okay, so if you add the 16t squared to both sides, you get 16t squared equals 625. And then you divide by 16, and so t squared is equal to 625 over 16. Those are both perfect squares. So did anybody figure out what times what equals 625? 25. And then what's on the bottom? 4. And then you can just make it into a decimal or a mixed number. If it's a decimal, it would be 6 1/4 or 6.25 seconds. So it's going to take 6.25 seconds to hit the ground. All right. Let's take a look at example 3. An object is dropped from a height of 512 feet. How long for the object to hit the ground? So the ground, what do we see? What do we have whenever it's the ground? H equals 0. Okay. And then what is the 512 feet? What does this represent? The starting point. So S equals 512. All right, so I want you guys to plug it in and see if you can solve it. All right, this one's not going to come out to a perfect square though, so we'll have to simplify the radical on this one, but you guys can do it. So try figuring this one out. All right, so once you get to t squared equals 32, we'll take the square root of both sides, and then you have to find a perfect square that divides into 32. So what's a perfect square that'll go into 32? 16 goes into it, right? 16 times 2. So 16 times 2. So what is the square root of 16? 4, and then we write the root 2. So 4 root 2 seconds would be t. So I forgot to take that off there. Okay. All right, let's take a look at the other side, and we'll talk about when an object is thrown or launched. All right, so the equation that we use for vertical motion when something is thrown or launched is h equals negative 16 t squared plus vt plus s. And so the h, the s, and the t are all the same as the other one. The new one here is v for velocity. And that's in feet per second. So when you guys do these problems, it's going to be really rare that they actually expect you to figure out the equation. They almost always just give it to you. So if you look at example 4, they say the height of a water bottle rocket is given by h equals negative 16t squared plus 320t plus 32. So you can see they already gave you the equation. You don't actually have to figure out where stuff goes. You just have to know h is the height and t is the time. So it says, what is the height after 10 seconds? So we're trying to find h. So h is what we don't know. And then t is equal to 10. And then you just plug it into that equation. So h equals negative 16 times 10 squared plus 320 times 10 plus 32. All right, so then we just go through and solve everything out. So we do our exponents first. So 10 squared is what? 100. And then 320 times 10, we just have to add a 0 to it. All right, so now I have negative 1600 plus 3200 plus 32. And so that comes out to 1632 feet, which is pretty high. All right, so then I want to know how long till it reaches the ground. So now what is h going to be? That means h equals 0, and the time is what I'm trying to find. So I use the same formula. For h, I put in 0, negative 16t squared plus 320t plus 32. So now it's a quadratic equation that I have to solve. So I'm either going to factor it, or I'm going to have to use the quadratic formula or completing the square. So before you try to factor it, the first thing you ought to do, though, is look to see, is there a GCF? So is there a greatest common factor that I can factor out? Is there a number that goes into 16, 320, and 32? 32. Smaller? 16, right? Because of the negative 16 out front. Okay, so we're going to divide everything by, I'm going to go ahead and divide by negative 16 so I can get rid of my negative sign too. Because I don't like to have a leading term that's negative. All right, so now I have 0 equals t squared minus 20t plus 2. So is there any way to multiply and get 2 and have it add up to 20? No. So that means you can't factor this one. So we can either complete the square or use the quadratic formula. Which one do you guys feel like, quadratic formula or completing the square? How many want to complete the square? How many want quadratic formula? How many of you are asleep? Okay, well, I think we had 1 vote for completing the square and like 3 votes for the quadratic formula, so I guess we'll use the quadratic formula. Alrighty. So, A, B, and C. A is 1, B is negative 20, C is 2. So negative B is positive 20 plus or minus, oops, x equals b squared, or square root of b squared. So what's negative 20 times negative 20? Never mind, I'll just write it first. 4 times a times c, all over 2a. Okay, have you guys figured out what negative 20 times negative 20 is yet? What's 20 times 20? 40. A little more. 400. All right, and then minus 4 times 1 times 2, so that's minus 8 all over 2. And so now we have 20 plus or minus the square root of 392 over 2. Oops, wait a second. Mrs. Dodge made a mistake. Back here. That should have been a negative 2 because I divided by negative 16, which means C is negative 2, which means that's negative, means this is plus, and so it's not 392, it is in fact 408. Sorry about that, guys. All right, so 408, I can tell that 4 will go into it. So that's 4 times 102. So when I simplify it, I have 2 times the square root of 102, and then it's all over 2, so I can actually just divide each of them by 2. And so then that is 10 plus or minus the square root of 102. Now, about what is the square root of 102? It's going to be really close to what? 10, right? But it's going to be a little bit more than 10. So if I do 10 minus a little bit more than 10, that's going to be negative. So we're going to throw out the negative answer because we can't go back in time. And so my answer is actually just 10 plus the square root of 102 seconds. Okay. Any questions? All right. This next one isn't so bad, actually. It's a little easier. All right, water is sprayed from a sprinkler, and the height of the water can be approximated by h equals negative 5x squared plus 20x. How long does it take for the water to reach the ground again after initially being sprayed? So what is h going to equal on this one? If it's on the ground, h equals 0. And we're trying to find the time. So we have 0 equals negative 5x squared plus 20x. Okay, I can't solve this one with square roots. I have to factor it. That it's not a trinomial. So how do we factor when it's not a trinomial? What do we look for? What is it? How about a common factor? Okay, so we're going to do this one by factoring out the GCF. So go ahead and factor that one for me. Factor out the greatest common factor and put what's left in parentheses. Okay, so when you factor it, what was our GCF? Okay, 5x, and I'm going to go ahead and take out the negative 5x. And so I'm left with x minus 4. So when you have two things multiplying to equal 0, then one of those has to equal 0. So either negative 5x equals 0 or x minus 4 equals 0. So here I get x equals 0, and for the second one I get x equals 4. So the x equals 0 is actually where it started, so that's not the one that I want. X equals 4 would be the answer to that one. So x equals 4 seconds. Okay, so it took 4 seconds before it would reach the ground again. Okay, any questions? All right, that finishes this.